Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, the podcast for the films you may not want to take home to mom and dad, but they might be worth sneaking out for. I am Marc Dottavio.
And I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we welcome Robert Daniels, film critic and associate editor at RogerEbert.com. If you are not familiar with today's film, it is a bold and provocative statement about police violence against Black Americans. It stars Oscar winner Daniel Kaluuya and is the debut film of Melina Matsoukas, whose music video for Beyoncé's Formation caused controversy with its defiant but celebratory imagery that her first feature runs with. It is 2019's Queen and Slim. And to help us unpack all of this is Robert Daniels. In addition to being the associate editor at RogerEbert.com, Robert regularly contributes to the New York Times, IndieWire, Screen Daily, and Vulture. He's also written for the Criterion Collection, the LA Times, and Rolling Stone about Black American pop culture and issues of representation. Robert, thank you so much for taking the time out from this busy season to talk Queen and Slim with us.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be on. And yeah, it's I forget how many outlets I have listed in my bio. I gotta shorten that.
Does it shrink a little over time?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be. You try to figure out like what are the 3 or 4 most impressive, and then just stick to those.
Right. Well, I know that between the time of us booking this and now, I saw that it was basically announced that you would become associate editor at RogerEbert.com. So I would love to hear a little bit about that, because we've had a lot of writers for that site on this show, a lot of Chicago-based writers. So, I mean, what can you tell us about your journey to that position?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very interesting journey. I started writing for Roger Ebert as a contributor in 2019. I contributed a piece about the last Black man in San Francisco and home ownership in that film. And then I've just been kind of contributing ever since, mostly through festivals. So whenever Ebert's gone to Sundance or TIFF or any major festival that I'm at, I contribute a few reviews. And yeah, I mean, this just kind of came together a couple weeks ago, and I'm still kind of getting my feet wet in a editor position, which mostly is just kind of me editing think pieces and features and stuff like that, which is the kind of writing that's actually very close to my heart. I love review writing, but I love a good think piece, a good cultural piece, any time of the week. So it's been mostly that, and then me continuing the kind of writing that I've been doing there. And it's been fantastic joining the team, because it's as you guys probably already know, it's a very strong team of writers there.
Yeah, for sure. And we've talked about, what makes Chicago such a great place for film writers. And I think that we've settled on it being something about the not being too close to LA and feeling like there's a little bit more of a personal touch and maybe less of skin in the game as far as
exactly,
criticism and commentary goes. Or maybe you're all just a great group of guys. I don't know.
It's probably all the above.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I definitely know like the vibe when there's like a film that's premiered in New York and LA, and it's gotten these like really big raves, and we're kind of going to a screening like, all right, let's see what this is about. Let's see if the East Coast is overhyping something again, because it's based in New York.
Yeah, maybe it's that Midwest perspective that we relate to so much. Since we're not too far.
Yeah, I mean the as you guys know, there's Midwest nice, and I think Midwest nice really kind of creeps into a lot of Chicago critics' reviews. There's kind of a little bit of passive aggressive in it, and a little bit of spunk, but it's great.
Yeah, I like that. I did also want to ask real quick about your site, which is it 812 Film Reviews or 812? How would you say that?
Yeah, it's 812 Film Reviews. Yeah, it's named after.
I like that.
Yeah. It's named after Federico Fellini's 8 1/2.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Yeah, it's a bad name because no one ever gets it on there. Everyone's like, "Oh, is this your
If you get it right.
area? Is this your area code or is this your?"
It's the address, literally
Yeah.
the street address of the website.
Yeah. So no one. And then whenever I'm like, "Oh, it's 8.5," people are like, "Oh."
And that, I mean, was that pretty much just a self-started project from you?
Yeah.
For how many years ago was that?
That was back in 2018. Yeah. So, and that was the first time I'd ever done film writing. My background actually isn't in film. My undergraduate and my graduate degree are both from DePaul University, and they're in English literary studies. And so, yeah, I mean, I just after grad school, I wanted to get into book publishing, and I thought that I should probably keep my writing sharp in some way, and the best way to do that was to kind of self-publish through a blog. And I've always really liked movies, and it just felt right that would be the topic of the website. And it's kind of interesting because it took off like pretty quickly, you know. And somehow I've stuck around in this racket. I don't know how.
Yeah, and is that still? I mean, is that site like? Are you still actively updating that, or is that a little less of an going concern now that you have so many other things on your plate?
Yeah, I mean the blog doesn't get updated as much. It's kind of migrated over to Substack, and that there's a monthly newsletter that has like all of my work and all my like favorite first watches of the month that I send out to readers, and then sometimes, you know, if it's a piece I can't get placed anywhere else, it'll go up there. And I also do a black film streaming pick, so a black film that's on streaming that I think people should watch, which I have one of those coming out pretty soon, actually. Yeah.
Okay, well, that might actually be out then by the time this episode posts. So make sure everyone go out and check out 8.5 film reviews.
Oh, nice.
But don't type it in that way.
Yeah.
Just gonna want 812.
Google's gonna spit you out the internet. It's gonna spit you out to a black hole.
Right. Well, I guess my first question then is that, you know, the concept of this podcast is, you know, the movies can land on a continuum between just films that are disturbing or difficult to ones that are maybe controversial or polarizing. So you know, as far as you picking out this film, what's the angle that you were coming at with that?
Probably all the above. I mean,
Yeah.
I wait before I tell this story. Can I curse on here? Can I use any expletives?
Absolutely, we encourage
Okay,
it.
cool. All right, so I saw this film, Queen and Slim, and this is the first time I rewatched it earlier today. So it's the first time I've watched it since 2019 AFI Fest, which was its world premiere, and it was in Grauman Chinese Theater, just resplendent theater in Los Angeles. And when it got toward the end, and I don't know if we will do spoilers yet, but when it got to the end, Snoop Dogg, who was sitting in the seat in front of me, Mahershala Ali was in back of me. I was like the least important person of this trio.
Man, any story that starts like this has to be good.
But Snoop Dogg gets up and says, "Fuck this shit," loud as hell for the entire theater to hear it, and storms out. Whoa. And I was like, oh, this might get an interesting reaction when it finally, like, the general public finally sees it. And I gave the film a positive review. I wrote a review for the playlist. I don't want to say enjoy, because I think enjoy might be a harsh word. Sure. You know, it's I'm not sure I would apply a enjoy to this to the subject matter of this film. Yeah, but when it finally came out, it just this furor, that kind of this wave that hit Black Twitter and then kind of spilled out all over all of Twitter. Kind of like made this into a movie that was incredibly controversial and incredibly divisive, and it I think was kind of like the culmination of the how much trauma should be in Black film. And it kind of like, it was like a third rail kind of movie for a couple of months there. And then it kind of like faded off and no one's really talked about it since. Melina Moustakis hasn't made another film. I mean, that was back in 2019, and this film, it made money. It more than doubled its budget at the box office. And yet no one really talks about this movie. And so I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of revisit it, mostly because I'd been meaning to revisit it, and especially in a post summer 2020 world, like how the film plays and if it's still a touchy third rail kind of film.
See, I forget whose review it was, but I think they were kind of like a higher profile critic, and they said the exact same thing at their showing, that somebody like got up and said literally like those words, like "fuck this shit," and stormed out. So
it was Snoop. I'm here to break the news. It was Snoop.
It was Snoop Dogg. It's amazing. Or I'm sure Snoop Dogg was not alone. It's like, from what a lot of I've read, it is like lots of discourse around where this all is headed and how it's all treating police violence and all of this. Yeah.
The funny thing is, he did show up to the after party.
Sure.
Yeah, he did show up to the after party, and it's like it was like kind of like Black Hollywood royalty showed up to this after party. It was like Rihanna was there, and people were going crazy and rushing the stage, trying to like just grace her. It was it was an interesting night that included Snoop Dogg saying "fuck you" and Mahershala looking shook. So I looked back and I was like, "Did you see that?"
Yeah. Is he gonna kick my ass?
I wish that. Yeah, God, we got to get Snoop on this show because I want to get his perspective on this. I want him to elaborate on that pithy review that he gave it.
Does he have a letter?
Short and to the point.
Right. Well, yeah, that was going to be another thing I was going to ask, because this was actually the first time that I had heard of this movie, and I think it was the same thing for Seth when you brought this up. And
I had heard of it, but yeah.
So it sounds like this is something that hasn't gotten its due in your view since it's come out.
Yeah, I still, having rewatched it, I still like the film. I still think it's visually evocative. I love Daniel Kaluuya in it. I think it might be his best performance. Yeah, I think he's just so soulful and charming, and just he's tapping. I think Melina gets him to tap into something very, very deep and very personal in this film, and yeah, I definitely think it's a film that kind of arrived at the wrong time. It was the wrong movie at the wrong time, and I think a lot of anger about other films that were probably worse in terms of like Black trauma got latched onto this film. Which I wouldn't go as far as to say that the critiques were unwarranted of the film, of how it treats Black bodies, but I don't think it kind of like deserved to be cast off into Siberia somewhere either.
Yeah, and it's weird to remember that this was just the year before the pandemic and the George Floyd protests that kind of made this topic a little more of a mainstream concern for white people, at least. But it's such an evergreen subject matter that you could easily go back then and see what an issue this was with police violence. And then since then, this movie takes place in Cleveland, Ohio. And we were saying earlier, we're from Akron, which was just last year where the Jalen Walker shooting happened. And that was just months ago, I think, at this point, that they failed to indict the police officers. And so you just see this replaying over and over and over again. And this one in particular, I guess, hit home just because of the proximity to us, but it is, yeah, it's crazy just to think about how this could have come out yesterday. It could have come out 5, even 10 years ago. Like, it's just this cycle that just keeps going and going.
Yeah, I mean, it's I always hesitate when other critics use the word timely, because it's like, because it's hard to call something timely that's always been happening, right? Keeps happening over and over and over again. Like it was timely. It's timely today. It was timely yesterday. It was going to be timely tomorrow, unfortunately. And so this one, it's interesting. So I couldn't even, because I know the film, of course, is making reference to other shootings, and murders that have happened at the hands of police, but there have been so many that's almost like the details almost like blur into one, and so like it feels like this is kind of representation of almost all these that have happened, even the stuff that hasn't happened yet, and so it's fascinating to kind of look at it post 2020 and see like, oh yeah, these, especially the protest scene, like thinking about that scene and thinking about the similar scenes that played out across several US cities, and several cities around the world, because someone like John Boyega, right, was protesting in London, and so yeah, I mean it's interesting to see how the imagery just keeps coming back and replaying.
Yeah, and for anyone who's listening and isn't familiar with that, I mean, that might partly be because this film it doesn't start out being about a particular police shooting. It's actually kind of a twist where this couple kills a police officer in self-defense and then takes off on the run, which is kind of that's a different angle to come at it from. And I would also like to talk about the director of this, Melina. Is it Matsoukas or Moutsakis, or I always struggle sometimes with
Matsoukas, I think.
Matsoukas. Okay,
yeah,
and she is known for music videos up to this point for like Rihanna and Solange and Beyonce, but particularly that Formation music video, which I think is so relevant, I guess, to this conversation, because when that came out in 2016, I remember, all the usual suspects getting upset about it and finding it provocative, and that joined with her Beyonce's Super Bowl performance of this song. It's crazy to see the line go from that to this movie, because I think there is a lot about this movie that you can kind of tell it's by somebody who started in music videos, and I think there's things about it that are kind of telling about it being a first film as well. But yeah, I mean, is there anything you can tell us about this director, because she hasn't made a film since, I believe?
Yeah, I mean, she really has primarily been working in television now. So she made she had a directed episode of The Changeling earlier this year, and then she also directed Why the Last Man, but she hasn't really done much since this. I mean, some commercial work, and that's been kind of it. And yeah, I mean, you see, you mentioned Formation, and much of the stuff in Formation can be traced back to Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust. So you see kind of that lineage, and when you get to this film, it really does look like a music video director. I mean, there's a certain kind of like gloss and panache you get in a music video, particularly the way that she uses color. I think you really see her drawing on that use of color that she did in Formation, and the use of kind of like Black regality and this kind of like kinetic energy that's kind of flowing through much of her compositions, that feels defiant and defiant and kind of like steeped in this vintage right? There's like the kind of a vintage kind of lacquer that's over this that recalls Gordon Parks, and a few other great black photographers from the 1950s. Um, and so yeah, I mean, it sucks because I think there's some first time filmmaker issues, as you said. Like the script goes on for a tad too long, and I think the composition, I think her editing could use just a tad bit of refinement. But for a first time feature, it's very assured and very accomplished. And you can tell that this is a person who has had the reps of doing commercials and has had the reps of doing music videos and kind of fine tuning their voice in a way that makes that gives us just kind of a visual flair that I wish she was able to exercise in another feature soon.
Yeah, I think visually, like the visuals are my favorite part of the movie. The way it's all like, and they could be kind of a dividing, yet another dividing factor for audiences. There is like a lot of space here. It definitely uses its runtime, and it isn't afraid to have like asides and vignettes and to draw things out, like on this whole, like on it being a road movie, right? And like having taking time to show the setting and like montages. Like there's a lot of like wild like montage editing. We can get to some of the finer points, like the climactic like uh protest scene and everything. But there's like this there's like a heightened reality to some of it. It almost feels like a music video, um which is really interesting in that it kind of ties, like Terrence Malick came to mind, which this is like in reference to like Bonnie and Clyde. It seems like the 60s Bonnie and Clyde movie, and Badlands, which is like a follow-up to Bonnie and Clyde in its own way, and it is some of the like voiceover techniques where they are like, they're not voiceovers, they're more like we are not watching their mouths move, but there's a conversation happening, uh, and we're getting shots of like the landscape or maybe their faces or maybe their backs or something. I thought that was kind of striking at certain points for sure.
Yeah, and I would also say that another film that I think this is indebted to is Thomasine and Bushrod, which I don't know if you guys have seen that before, but it's directed by Gordon Parks Jr. It's from 1974. Gordon Parks Jr., of course, the son of the legendary photographer Gordon Parks. He directed Superfly, and he also directed Three the Hard Way.
Oh,
Died very young, I think at age 44. But Max Julian also wrote the Thomasine and Bushrod. Max Julian was just coming off the Mac and also writing Cleopatra Jones, the Tamara Dobson film. And that film is similarly, it's set in the West, actually, Thomasine and Bushrod. And it stars Max Julian as Bushrod and Vanetta McGee as Thomasine. And it's similarly about black outlaws who are on the run. Thomasine and Bushrod in that film are bank robbers, and they're hoping to, they're kind of like bouncing from friend group to friend group, trying to hide away from the marshal that's chasing them. And so you kind of see the overlap and the parallels between that film and this film too.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the defining things, I guess, about this movie is that, it starts out with this very tense, inciting incident that happens with the policeman. And then what follows from that is it does really kind of relax and sprawl out. Like you said, this is a pretty long movie. It's over 2 hours. And instead of it focusing on necessarily on the urgency of them escaping or following the detectives as they're trying to track them down or something, it feels like it feels like a first time director who is trying a whole bunch of different things out throughout. So there's some scenes that seem like there's a more overt comic relief, like the guy they hit with the car and have to take to the hospital and his ranting and yelling at his son. And then these more lyrical interludes with the voiceovers like Seth was talking about. We do have we do have a few close calls with the police, but then we have, this time that they take out to, go to a bar and kind of shoot the shit for a while, and almost like it's a vibe kind of hangout movie at different times. And it might not have the most control over the tonal shifts from part to part, because it does really feel like a first-time director who is trying to just throw in every idea to kind of fill that time between the big opening and the big closing.
Well, then, and then you also have the opening scene at the diner is wonderful, which is Slim and Queen are on their first date, and Queen is kind of like Slim's been trying to get in contact with Queen for a while, and Queen's been kind of like putting him off, and then mysteriously or magically today she decided to say yes to a date. And she just she works as a defense attorney, and one of her clients she wasn't able to save. And so, she sees this as kind of a brief excursion, right? I mean, these are two people who under normal settings probably would have just had this date and maybe would have exchanged a couple extra messages, but they probably would never have seen each other again. They really are kind of like oil and water as a couple. But Daniel and Jodie Turner-Smith have so much chemistry just in this first scene, and particularly Daniel Kaluuya, who I think doesn't, as I would say, rarely gets to you see him in interviews where he's so charming and so bewitching, right? But that doesn't always translate into what he does on the film side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Widows, he's playing a very dark persona. Black Panther, it's hard to kind of push your way through that at all. And maybe I guess the closest he does come to kind of having that charm is in Get Out, but that's only for maybe the first 20 minutes before he's deep in it.
Right, I was excited to see him in something more sprawling and realistic. I was really excited,
and something more romantic too.
Right?
Yeah, and they just have such great chemistry. I think he's really bringing a lot out of Jodie as well, and Jodie, who I think is a fine actress, but really needs a great scene partner. And Daniel, I think, is a fantastic scene partner for her.
Yeah, the acting is definitely a strong point here, and like you said, Jodie Turner-Smith, like I do think she does a really good job, and she is a little greener, I guess, than Daniel Kaluuya. Just she doesn't have quite the filmography at this point yet. But when they're together, I definitely think is the strongest thing. And it's funny too, is that they're both British in real life, and it's Daniel Kaluuya is like one of those actors I always forget that about, like Christian Bale or somebody that you never get to see them like not doing their American accent or some other kind of accent too. So I think that's funny that they were paired together in that way.
Yeah, I mean, what I could see though is with Jodie, yeah, she's a little greener and stuff, but I think some of the things, and maybe it's more on the writing side, she's got a lot more to do and like sell. Like some of the things are kind of difficult. Like she's trying to play, it seems like, this contradictory kind of character who's like one way but actually is another way, and also like very complicated things, like she has an uncle but she has this uneasy relationship with him because he killed her mother but she saved him. It's like kind of like complicated stuff going on that is not the easiest to sell, like regardless of what kind of actor you are, I guess. Some of the plot points, I guess.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I struggled with, I guess, with this movie was kind of making sense of the Queen character, and I don't think that is the fault of Jodie Turner-Smith, because I think each individual thing she gets to do, she fully invests in. But yeah, there is a point where, I prefer characters, to have contradictions and to be fascinating in that way. But there were times I was kind of having a hard time keeping up with like what her arc really is here, or that maybe there were too many ideas for her having this icy standoffish side, particularly at the beginning. Um, but then there's also this side of her that's, encouraging, Kaluuya to go, horse riding or hang out the car window, or I don't know. Did you feel any of that, Robert, with this character, or did that come together for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the oil and water about them is they're like characters, they're archetypes, and they're characters who I think see the world vastly differently. Where somehow, and this is kind of like the part I'm like, okay, there's a bit of suspension of disbelief, but the naivete of Slim, where he is just like,
Mhm.
well, why can't we go to why can't we turn ourselves in? Why can't we just
Mhm.
call for help? And like Slim really is like he knows that he's a black man in this world, but he kind of is living almost like a fantasy, right? And so he almost has to kind of become hardened, whereas she is a pragmatist. She works in law, and she's seen probably the worst of humanity, and so she spends the movie kind of like loosening up, and she's always kind of fighting against that, and they're both always kind of fighting against like their instincts, because like Slim to the very end kind of like has this belief that Jody doesn't, that Queen doesn't. And so I think that's kind of the way I made sense of their arc, not necessarily in terms of like um the individual beats of like their backstories, but more of the emotion that they represent and the way that they see the world. How they really kind of like, he starts from up here, she starts from down there, and then they kind of meet in the middle by the end.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah, and her
sure.
being an attorney is interesting here too, especially when we first meet her. She is at her most rational and pragmatic, and not particularly into Slim. It doesn't seem like when they are leaving that first date. I'd say indifferent at best, maybe a little interested
Yeah, she
as a
finds him too
possibility.
timid. Yeah, and not her
And,
type really. She is like just kind of trying to get a little relief for a bad day, it seems.
Yeah, and I do find it interesting then that, the way that this shooting unfolds, which I think is a very tense scene that I think is very well done, and maybe my favorite in the movie as far as just the gut level effect of it, and this decision that she makes to run with him. When, I mean, I would assume, being an attorney, she would know that at least, from that there would be dash cam footage, that it would be very small chances they would get away, but also that she hasn't technically committed any crime, as far as, she gets shot by the cop actually, and is the one who kind of instigates them going on the run. And then she kind of immediately squanders that card by taking a sheriff hostage, and, actually committing crimes too. So interesting to see that it seems like she was doing this on Slim's behalf, where she could have kind of not, she could have just let him
Right, it almost goes
go on
over
the
your
run.
head because of the way her character works, because she's so strong and stern about it all. But yeah, you don't even think about it until after it's happened. Like, oh, this is like, in a way, there's something deeper here, that she is willing to go on a limb for people, and like even the stranger, like she has a deep compassion for this stranger.
Yeah, I think it goes back to her being a defense attorney, right? I mean, she comes in to this situation where um she's like pretty much lost the case, and she's feeling terrible about that. And so when they get pulled over, like you can see the tension rising in her, and you can see her kind of basically being, you can almost like
Mhm.
read across her face like, not again. I've got like I'm not
Right, she
gonna
gotta
let
save
this
this
happen.
one.
Yeah, I'm not gonna let this happen again. And her, like, on a different day, when she wasn't dealing with that many pressures, maybe she doesn't get out of the car and maybe they drive away. But on that day, she wasn't going to take any more shit from a police officer. She wasn't going to take any more shit from that side of the law. And once the incident goes down, I mean, I think her as a defense attorney, it only makes sense for her to just, say, I'm this is, for lack of a better term, this is my client, and we're going on the run. I'm gonna guide you through, and we might only have a slim chance of making it, but you got a better chance with me.
Slim
chance. That's a good tie in there. Yeah. And, I definitely want to mention the music too, because as befits a music video director, there's a lot of needle drops of great soul and hip hop songs, but we also have original score from Dev Hynes from Blood Orange, who I didn't realize he was the one who did that until afterwards. And I think that's definitely a big contributor to the atmosphere and the parts of this that work best, is that he's all about conjuring these individual moments and atmosphere that even if she's maybe less concerned about how they all hold together in that chain, that this is very much a movie you can take scene by scene and see like specifically what mood is being conjured up.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely if there's one thing that she knows, Melina knows coming into this movie, it is how to marry sound and image together. And I find it interesting, like, as you kind of delve deeper and deeper and deeper into the South, how much more haunting the music becomes. I mean, I wouldn't call this necessarily a Southern Gothic, but it definitely starts kind of veering toward that through the use of the use of the music.
Sure, because you might expect this from the log line that this is going to be some kind of a thriller, and I don't know, how would you define this movie? Because I feel like it throws in so many more things than that, and it doesn't play like the Black Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, it is no thriller in my opinion. Yeah.
And I actually think it might be least comfortable in some of those scenes that are trying to generate suspense, whether it's that him stopping at the gas station and that guy demanding that he lets him hold his gun in order to let him drive off for gas for free. And when he actually handed him the gun, I was like, what? Are you kidding me?
Dude.
And or that call home to his dad too, which I think is a good scene, but also, a little convenient that he happens to be sitting right there with all the cops, for like an unplanned phone call. It's, I don't know. It was almost like it was the smaller things as opposed to the bigger gestures, or whenever it would kind of go towards generating excitement or suspense.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely works. I'm closer as a I don't want to say a character study, but almost as a character study, where like really it's, as you said, it's the quieter beats, right? Where we're kind of with these two people, especially in the kind of like dance roadhouse scene.
Yeah,
that's just a wonderful moment. That really isn't particularly germane to the story. I mean, nothing gets added in that scene narrative wise, but that scene I think says everything for them as characters and how they're starting to kind of grow closer and starting to find this attraction into each other, not just physical but also just the way that they're starting to interpret each other's best habits. Yeah,
to me it almost feels it feels both like a character study, but also again like a road movie, like an adventure movie, even though this is like, you wouldn't want to use that word necessarily either, because it is like a real world kind of like horror that's going on, that's chasing them, but there is something beautiful to the journey. At least that's kind of like what's trying to be communicated, that there is something beautiful to this like final bit of this journey that they do get to have with each other, and the little things that they make out of it.
Well, and that structure means that we have quite a big supporting cast in this too. A
Yes.
lot, some people who were new to me, and then all of a sudden, I remember turning to Seth while we were watching this and saying, "Is that Flea?" And yes, it was Flea, married to
Chloe
Chloe
Sevigny.
Sevigny. Yeah, and I was
She
kind of
was
hoping
delightful.
that the rest of the movie he would just keep, like the Wizard of Oz, just keep meeting more of the Red Hot Chili Peppers until they all join along on the journey.
Anthony Kiedis driving the plane.
Yeah. But
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So no, sorry.
no, they have smaller roles though compared to some of the other people we get, like the uncle character.
Yeah, I was happy that was sort of like the only instance, but that's just a personal thing for me. When I see like bigger actors like that, they kind of stick out in a movie like this that is mostly relative unknowns. They just kind of stick out, and suddenly I'm just thinking about Flea and thinking about Chloe Sevigny. But it is a brief scene.
Bokeem Woodbine though is absolutely fantastic in this. This is kind of like I don't think anyone's really talked about how much of a comeback Bokeem Woodbine has had. He's in a film called The Inspection last year. He's in a A24 film called Earth Mama this year, and I think he's just an interesting actor who always brings a realism. Like you see him come on screen and you're like, oh, that's a real person. Like he's always able to ground the character in reality, even from even when you see him in something like the Rock,
Right.
or
Yes.
really really young Bokeem and Crooklyn actually too,
Mhm.
and Dead Presidents, and when he shows up in the Eddie Murphy comedy Life playing Can't Get Right. He's just always this kind of like MVP who shows up and just kills it. And he does the same thing here as the uncle character, who's incredibly funny. I also think that Bokeem, what he's really good at, because he's able to ground characters very easily, is
Mhm.
I would say most of the time he's usually working with less than just about every single character in a script, but it feels like he's always able to build a really rich inner life on the screen for the character, even if you don't get any backstory for him. And you get a little bit of backstory here for his character, but so much of it I think is imparted through his performance and through his kind of his mix of bravado and false bravado and the kind of tenderness yet hurt that's inside of him. He comes on for what I don't even think 10 minutes, like maybe 8 minutes, and just kills it.
Yeah, it feels like a lot longer too. And that's kind of
Yeah.
the magic of those character actors who you recognize from tons of movies, maybe without knowing exactly like what their name is or even where you recognize them from, and are always just able to bring it to life. Because he's definitely the first one who comes to my mind, and I would have thought that he was even in more of the movie than that. But now that I looking back on it, he's really not.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, he has maybe three scenes,
hmm.
four. The first when they show up to the house, then later with the trimming and the disguising, then the fight that happens, and then the burning of the car, and that's it. He's in and he's
Yeah, you're
out.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I want to talk then, I guess, about one scene that I would imagine would be the most divisive in the movie. Besides, we can get to the ending after that, but this does try what I call the Munich scene, which is always a risky one, where you're intercutting characters in the throes of passion, and a sex scene intercut in this case with a police or a protest against police. Uh, that not just that. I mean, it ends with this very minor character played, like by a little boy who ends up shooting a cop, and we don't get a ton of follow up on that. But
Well, yeah,
I
the
don't know.
little
Is that a
boy and a lot of it seems like there's like a movement around Queen and Slim, and the little boy is sort of one of them that is seeing them as heroes, like folk heroes or
hmm,
something. And yeah, he pulls out a gun and like threatens a cop, and shoots the cop eventually, and then he's gunned down. But all the while, yeah, we are finally like having like the consummation of this, like, will they, won't they, of Queen and Slim, which we've been sort of like watching them, like, are they going to get together or not? And this is the point where they do like fuck in the car, and it is intercut and in Munich fashion, as Mark says. I forgot that happens in Munich till you said that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will kind of make fun of that scene in Munich. So I guess I am curious about, like, was this maybe too big of a swing here? Or I don't know, how does it play revisiting the movie?
I do love Munich. Munich is a fantastic movie. I think it's one of
I agree.
most understood films. But I don't think that swing works here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's just a little, I think it's a little bit too much of a live wire, particularly including the kid. I think once you include kids in it, then you can't, if it was like, I think a protest of all adults, it probably would have played easier. But
It's like
when you have when you have a kid in there, I think it can veer toward feeling either overtly manipulative or very like gross and apathetic in a way to the tone of either of the two scenes that you're intercutting with. Even though I think the heated sex scene in here is amazing. It's very well filmed.
I was honestly, seeing like real sex in like a mainstream theatrically released movie, just well shot, beautiful scene.
But it's so like politically fraught. And this was the scene. This was one of the two scenes that when this film came out, people were angry about it. Lots of people, and it like filled up Twitter of it was particularly Black Twitter, of the two tones that are really like kind of clashing in these scenes. And funny enough, for some reason, I kind of remember this scene because I kind of only remember the blowback. I almost remember this, and maybe I'm like desensitized. I don't know, but it felt like this scene was more gruesome than what I remembered. And I mean, it's not clean, it's not great, but for some reason I've seem to remember, because I know the kid. We find out that the kid eventually was murdered during this protest, but we don't see the kid's murder. We just see him shooting the cop, and it just kind of like cuts out of there. And for some reason, I can't remember. I thought I remembered seeing the kid shot, but I guess my mind is playing tricks on me. Unless they edited that out for the theatrical, but I don't think there was a different cut. So it's kind of interesting how like the mood and word of mouth around a movie can change it and kind of make you think like something was worse than what it was. I mean, like I said, I think the intercutting between these two scenes is crass, but I don't think it's malicious, in any way.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it like offensive or anything like that. I don't think it works, but
hacked together like, art school a little bit. I don't know. Like, I don't know if there's necessarily a great thesis around it. I have to like really stretch my mind to find anything more than just like sex and love and war and hate, and I don't know how it all. Yeah, that's not much more than that, I feel like.
Yeah, like it's making a big statement, but I'm not sure really what the statement is. But it's too bold for it to be so vague. But then again, I think like I love Munich too. Still roll my eyes a little bit, even when Spielberg tries to pull something like that off. So,
yeah, for sure,
it was a good try.
I think the Munich is definitely silly too.
But how does that then follow into the ending? Because the ending does go kind of big, as far as it's a very big dramatic a big swing in its own way, and seems that Snoop wasn't happy with it. I'm surprised Snoop sat through the sex scene too, but he guess he made it all the way. He had to get to the after party, so he wasn't going to leave, I guess. But
no,
yeah,
Snoop
is that
was definitely like, I've seen you, Nick. I know what she's doing.
He loves him.
Yeah. So what is the end? I know I had a feeling throughout this movie, like I'm getting the vibe that this is going to end with a tragically, because there is this doomed romance kind of thread going through it, and I think it plays it up as big as possible in that ending. And so I'm curious to just hear where everybody lands with that. Did that swing connect as much as the rest of the movie, or did you want anything more out of that? Is it too simple?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the movie, I mean, I think when this all happened online, I can remember thinking like, well, I don't think there was ever a moment I thought they were going to get away. And maybe I'm just like a bleak person. I don't know, but there was never a
Same
moment where I
here.
was like, they're going to get on that plane and they're going to fly away. And I know they're referencing, and they do reference it in the film, Asata Shakur, who shot a cop and still remains at large. She is in Cuba right now. She was part of the Black Panther Party and ended up fleeing by plane to Cuba and is still there despite a U.S. Efforts for extradition. But
It is
so
possible.
I know that's I know that's lurking in the background. But also, part of me was like, but that happened like in the 70s. Like, it's someone really pulling that like today. You know, the idea of like a especially like in a post 9/11 world, like a prop plane kind of like taking off from Florida airstrip and getting all the way to Cuba. It's just I don't think I ever thought they were going to live. And seeing it a second time, I don't think the film really ever entertains the idea that they're going to get away. I think there is a cloud of like doom that's hanging over them, that they're they're here for the journey and they're living every single day like it's going to be their last, which is a lot of like the activities they do. Like, Daniel's like, I want to get on a horse. Jody wants to kind of like hang out of a car window as they're driving and stuff like that. And I think there's always this sense of like the fleeting moment that's hanging over this film. And this is another one. I thought it was more gruesome, and I know like everyone's kind of level of trauma that they can take or endure is different. But for some reason, I don't know if I thought there were like close-ups in this, but it's actually like pretty staid in terms of like how it's shot. It's Jody is a bit more kind of in your face the way that Melina shoots it, but when Daniel's character Slim is shot, I mean, we're pretty far out of the scene, the action of the scene, to like really get a clear vision of what happened. We just kind of hear the sounds and we see his body move and fall to the ground. And so I'm not sure it was really this scene that necessarily set everyone off. I do think that everything that's after this scene, like the ending, which is just like, it's weird to say this because there are like 3 false endings in this film.
It keeps going to black and then back and then
there are 2 or 3 false endings in this film, but it feels rushed, right? And rather than kind of do the 2 or 3 false endings, I wish it had kind of just teased it out more and just kind of let us hang in this world, in a post kind of Queen and Slim world, and saw more of the reaction to it and the temperature of the world after it, rather than, all right, we get everyone's quick reaction, everyone's sad, all right, quick funeral scene. All right, and then quick, they're throwing up their poster on the wall, and now they're forever memorialized. Like I wish we'd kind of stayed in the aftermath a lot longer. And I think if she had given a bit more breath to that, then the shooting scene wouldn't play as abruptly as it plays.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as far as my feelings on the ending, I guess I'm in the minority on this podcast, but I don't know necessarily reading the reviews and some of the reactions that I'm in the minority in general, like with this movie, that I was kind of hopeful. I don't know. I get it.
Fool.
Like once it happens, like I get it. And actually, I'm watching it. I know one or the other is going to happen, and we can feel this impending doom. And I guess that's always the tricky thing with endings, is like you can flail all you want throughout the runtime, and then the ending is tricky because it's now the math's got to actually add up, and it's all got to land. Which it seems like what is constantly like at war with each other is the feeling that this movie is being like playing with archetypes rather than characters, or like a more like transcendent, more expressionistic, like adventurous kind of feeling, while that like it's kind of like fighting with this being obviously very real, and this is about real things, and is trying to communicate things like how they would go. I don't know. So some of that just really did point to feeling like this was going to go in some sort of like more hopeful, like I don't know. And and if anything, I was kind of excited by that, because like I know the movie that does what this movie does at the end. I feel like I don't know the movie necessarily where they do get away, and I was kind of excited by that. And I was reading. I do think there are like other viewers that's why it was so divisive, because it was kind of a letdown. I think some viewers just did, even if it wasn't realistic, and even if certain things were pointing towards that not happening, and the absurdism of Cuba escape, like they wanted that because it's a movie. And that's always like, again, the toss up with this movie and the way it feels is like it's like wanting to be totally realistic, and also wanting to give this expressionistic, like it's a exciting like characters that I'm building, and a romance and things. So yeah, I don't know. It felt kind of conflicted in the end.
It would have been the unexpected way to go, because whether you're looking at Bonnie and Clyde or Thieves Like Us or all those movies in that template, they tend to end with that going down in a hail of gunfire
Right.
kind of moment. Or Thelma and Louise. I mean, there's a whole tradition of that, I guess. So
right, I guess
maybe
it
could have
so
been
gruesome.
more.
Like it's not gruesome to see like us like some character you don't care about like exploding in blood, but it's another thing to spend the entire movie. I think that's why it was so like intense for folks, to like we spend all this time like developing this relationship finally, and then we have to watch them die. Yeah, right.
I mean, did you get a sense, Robert, of what people were upset about specifically with that? Was it just the decision of them not getting away? Was it something about how it was presented? I don't know if you talked to Snoop afterwards about it, but was there something in particular that was touchy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea that they didn't get away, and I think how much it kind of, because of course, I think what Melina's doing is she's playing in that genre conceit, right? She knows these other films, and she knows in these other films they don't get away. But those other films didn't mix. I mean, Bonnie and Clyde, of course, does, because it's based on real people. But they didn't mix reality, I think, as much as this does, right? Where I think a lot of people were like, we've connected with these characters, and we've come to adore them, and then they get murdered at the end, just like X person in real life gets murdered at the end. And I think there were so many examples of other Black people who had been murdered that in real life, that I think people were looking for this film for more escapism than what it was willing to give. I won't even, maybe even escapism isn't the right word, but I think they were looking for more of a balm over that than this movie was willing to give. And so, yeah, I think that's really what touched the nerve, right? Was that it wasn't just the way it was shot, it was or the tone of the film. It really was like, oh, even in movies we can't get the ending that we wish we could have gotten in real life.
Okay,
and I
that
think
makes sense.
that's yeah, I think
Very
that's
70s.
really kind of like hit people and made them less than happy with this ending.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me too, especially when there's limited representation on screen. That's always an issue where it's like, are all of our stories going to be victim stories? And that's for all different kinds of communities that can be the the rub. And so I'm assuming
Yeah,
that's kind of where they're coming from. Like, why can't we ever get more variety? Like, why does it always have to be a tragedy?
or tragedy, or I think kind of weaponizing anger, right?
Mhm.
Like this sense of like, look what's happening to us. We're going to put this film out that's about that, and it is going to anger people enough that we're going to incite change through that anger, right? And I think some black viewers, at least some black viewers I knew, I don't want to speak about blackness in a monolith, but some black viewers that I knew were just apoplectic, apoplectic. There we go. Yeah. About like not just a film where it's like, oh, this is the one time we get to have one of these films, and it's once again steeped in trauma, but it's also like, why is it that this is the only film that can be approved? Why is it like our bodies are being weaponized when in a film, when really, I mean, we don't need we don't need a film to do that. Like real life is already doing that. And so I think there was just kind of like this like repetition of hitting this open wound, and this was like the last hit that really kind of like broke it open. And this film got a lot of pushback because of it.
Right, and I do hear what you're saying about the rush of the ending too, like the like just before the credits of it trying to, I don't know, like acting. It doesn't mean to, I feel like, but it because it's so rushed, it does feel like it's just trying to wrap it up really quick and be like, but it's okay because their death was a symbol and it inspired people, which is like, you can feel like as a viewer or anyone who knows someone, like there's only like who is affected by something like that, or like you spend proximity, even if they're just a character in a movie, you're not necessarily like satiated by that. You are still like, yeah, but like I got to know these people, and like I'm not interested in that necessarily in the conceit of the greater film. Like I'm still saddened, and I think that's still there. There's just there's a lot to do to communicate all that properly, I think, and with like only 2 minutes, it's a lot to do.
Yeah, there's no shortage of ideas and angles in this movie, which can get a little unruly, I think, and that extends into the ending. Um, but I'll just say, as just kind of my final thoughts, then I'll give everybody a chance to say anything that we haven't gotten to, or any final conclusions that came from this viewing. That there's so many ingredients here that are tantalizing in little moments, not the least of which is that at least this is a story that is, directed by a Black woman, written by a Black woman, which is still something that there's a shortage of. And so I really admire that about this, and that the script definitely for me could have used a lot of more finessing and focus, and that it is definitely a flawed film in many ways, a debut film that I think has seeds there for something greater that could come. I don't know if anybody saw the film Emergency from last year, which tackles. There's a lot of similarities where that's also a story of, in that case, well, I guess, and in this case too, like black people who didn't actually commit a crime, but they just know they can't go to the cops and that things are going to look bad and the deck's going to be stacked against them. And they end up getting even deeper into it, trying to avoid that. And I think that's a more focused film that at least starts out as more of like a dark comedy, but it does get into some very heavy stuff as it goes. And I thought about that a lot during this, that I don't know, maybe this film Queen and Slim walked so Emergency could run one day, and maybe tackle things in a little more focused and effective way. But I'm definitely glad that I was finally exposed to it, and that hopefully it leads to more opportunities. I know it's been 4 years now. I hope that we see more from these filmmakers. And so, yeah, is there anything else you wanted to say, Seth? And I'll let Robert have the final word.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those. It's a toss up with this movie because I appreciate where it's coming from, and it's like heart, and it's trying to do something very important, I think. And I mean, understandably, sometimes having a hard time knowing what to do with itself, because that's like, it's a very difficult subject matter, and knowing what an audience should get from it and shouldn't get from it. I think, and it is a toss up to like spend some of my time like griping about plot conveniences or like screenplay problems. If I do so, it is only like because I want a movie like this to succeed. So I mean, that's really where I come down with it, even though it is kind of flawed. I'm glad it exists, and as even if I like am on the side of kind of having, I don't know, feeling a little lukewarm about how the ending works or doesn't work. I think it's visually very striking, and I want to see more from this director. And if anything, it's like it will be interesting historically. I am curious what comes next. Yeah.
Yeah, and Robert, I would give you a chance to say whatever you want to, but I also just am curious if anything changed between, revisiting it now, between your memory of seeing it that first time.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think one of the things that didn't play as well this second time was, I think, many of the black cops in this film are kind of like benevolent, or they're like, I'll help you out, wink, wink, and so there's kind of this like essentialism, in it, and the sense like, oh, well, they're black, that means they're the good cops among the bad apples. And I think in a post 2020 world, we found that's fantasy. That's not not real.
Right. And I'm sure the filmmakers knew that even at this time. It just seems like that was a mistake. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe it got away from them. Yeah.
It would have been far more interesting, I think, really, to kind of show how not just like, oh, these black cops are around like these like racist white cops who don't trust them, don't trust their judgment. Like there's that one scene where they're trying to start up the car, and like this like black beat cop who is trying to warn this white cop about like, I think I heard something, and the white police officer's like, you city kids just don't know what you're talking about, and and it's like, you have those like microaggressions in there, or racist gestures thrown by white police officers, but it doesn't, like, the far more interesting angle would have been, okay, well, how does that environment make these black officers complicit in these power structures, and the film never really gets there, and it's a lot to take on in a film, especially one that's already running this long. but it definitely could have, this film could have stood to had a little bit more complexity in that sense. So that was, I think, the main thing that I think didn't play as well the second time. But seeing it a second time, though, I was even more taken by Melina's visual eye, and the composition that she has in here, and the lighting that she has in there. It's just gorgeous lighting throughout this film. Wonderful use of costume, especially Daniel Kaluuya's like maroon jumpsuit, which is like absolutely wonderful. And yeah, I mean, I seeing it again, I just hate that it's been this long. It's been 4 years since and we're coming now on 5 years. She doesn't really, I don't think she has anything in the can or anything like that. So we may be coming up on 5+ years where this filmmaker who showed it so much potential, isn't getting a second film. But yeah, I seeing it again in a post 2020 world, it was fascinating to see what remained, what was flatter in terms of like the representation of the black cops, and yet what still I think spoke. And I do think the anger in here, I don't think it's misplaced. I do think it's a righteous anger, and I do think that I think that at some point this film is going to find a new audience, a kinder audience to it at some point. I don't know when, but at some point, because I think there's just it's such a bold swing, and there's so many ideas in here, and they don't all work, but enough works that it sticks with you. So it was wonderful seeing it again, which I did. I mean, I use the word wonderful loosely because it is a very heavy film, but it was great returning back to it with these eyes, in this world that we're in right now.
All right, so maybe the lesson is Snoop Dogg should give this another chance. Pop it in again. See, maybe you'll find more to like this time.
Come on, Snoop.
Someone send him a link to this episode.
No, I'm so glad you brought this to the podcast, because I do think it's worthy of the thesis for sure. It's a very much, especially if you go online, it is fascinating the variance in opinions about it, and understandably so. It is like a modern day kind of controversial movie in its own way, and yeah, again, understandably so.
All right, well, Robert, thank you so much for giving us your time tonight in this busy season of film festivals and reviews, big movies coming out. Halloween, of course. Yeah, although that'll be over by the time this episode comes out. But this shall be out in early November. Is there anything around that time you want to draw anyone's attention to or plug?
Oh yeah, let me think. I'm trying to think. Hard, because I barely know what I'm going to eat tonight.
Right.
But much less what I'm doing in early November. I know by that point, Black Harvest Film Festival, which is a Chicago festival, will be coming back, and there's some great films that are playing there, like Cord Jefferson's American Fiction, which just won the audience award at TIFF, and stars Jeffrey Wright in a interesting satirical comedy of the publishing and movie world. It's like if your jam is like Hollywood Shuffle and Bamboozled, I would say keep an eye out for that. But yeah, I'm gonna be covering that for RogerEbert.com, and I think that's right now that's the main thing that's on the horizon. I am going to Memphis for Indie Memphis in a couple of days, but I will have returned by the time this comes out. But I am hoping to see some great movies there, like the new Hamaguchi, which is playing there. And yeah, but mostly Black Harvest Film Festival. So, like I said, you can read just about everything I write now on rogerebert.com, where I'm associate editor.
All right. That's so exciting.
Again. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. And make sure, just go ahead and follow Robert on Twitter too. And you'll see, I'm going to still call it Twitter. I don't care what anybody says.
The artist formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah. Whatever stupid name it has by the time this episode comes out. Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.